Stop the War Coalition convener and steering member of Freedom for Ocalan Campaign, Lindsey German. Thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. So let's start with Turkey's occupation attacks in the past months. Turkey has begun another effort to invade northern Iraq, as you know, on the premises of fighting against the PKK in their war against the Kurdish people, basically. Many civilians have been killed or displaced in the process as well. What do you think about Turkey's invasion of northern Iraq and their expansionist agenda in the region? And why have international governments such as the UK remained silent on this issue?
Well, I think that this isn't a new story, as you're very, very well aware. This is the story of the way in which Turkey constantly tries to find ways of persecuting the Kurds, tries to deny any right to a homeland for the Kurds. And we've seen a long, long period of this, briefly punctuated by peace talks, but essentially this has been going on for a long time. It, of course, goes back to two things. It goes back to the fact that the Kurdish people have never been given their own national homeland. This dates back to the over 100 years now, to the end of the Ottoman Empire. But also we see in Turkey quite an important regional player, and Turkey is determined to kind of assert its interests in the region. I think it's fairly simple why international opinion in the form of governments has said nothing or very little about this. And this is because Turkey is an ally of many of these governments. If you look at its role in NATO, it's of great strategic importance to the NATO leaders, to the US, to Britain, and to other countries. And this, of course, has become more important in a way with the war in Syria, which has been going on for a decade now. So I think all those reasons are important. Plus, of course, Turkey is playing a very useful role for the EU and for the European powers in terms of policing the whole refugee crisis, which is going on. So I think for all these reasons, we're not hearing any protests about what is going on with the invasion of northern Iraq.
Let's move on to another significant situation in Turkey's war against the Kurds. About Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader, as you know, is still in harsh isolation in violation of international rights convention as well. A mass hunger strike continues uh, uh, on its over the 120 days now in prisons in Turkey, with people demanding the end the isolation and resumption of negotiations for a peace process in which Öcalan plays the central role. What are your thoughts on this ongoing situation and the importance of Öcalan for achieving a peaceful political resolution of the Kurdish question?
Well, if you look at the situation with Ocalan, I think it's a situation which is completely unacceptable. He's been held in prison in solitary confinement. He's been held in most appalling conditions, and he is a political prisoner, and he should not be held. He should be freed, and he shouldn't be held in this way. I think, of course, the reason why this continues is that Ocalan represents the whole question of the Kurdish national movement, the Kurdish movement for independence, and this is what Turkey wants to weaken or prevent from being as effective as it can be. I think that obviously there is very high level of support for him. You refer to the hunger strikes, but also I think in many countries, people are aware of this situation, at least people on the left and people who are more politically aware and are very much opposed to it. If you look at all these conflicts that have gone on through history, in the end of the day, there has to be some kind of peace talks. There has to be some sort of negotiation which tries to bring this situation to an end. The fact that Turkey doesn't want to do this, I think, speaks volumes about its approach to the whole Kurdish question and the way that it wants to repress Kurdish nationalism and Kurdish culture and language and so on. And this is something that I think we have to continue to campaign against. If you look at the situation in Ireland, for example, there are many things wrong with the peace process and the Northern Ireland Agreement, but in the end of the day, you did have negotiations, and it did lead to the present situation that we now have, which was an improvement over the situation where many people were losing their lives and living in fear. So this is something that could happen quite easily, but it's the Turkish government which is really preventing this from happening.
There continue to be a large international campaign to realize freedom for Öcalan, including the Freedom for Öcalan UK Trade Union campaign. You are also a part of it and a big supporter as well. One of the most important names that supporting the campaign in the context of Öcalan's importance for a peace process. What do you think is the significance of the Freedom for Öcalan campaign?
I think it's very significant because we have a situation where the way in which these struggles are portrayed tends to be that there's a legitimate government and that these people who take up arms or who oppose them in any way are in some way illegitimate. And this is, of course, what they tried to do with the Kurdish people, and really they're described in PKK are described in many instances as terrorists and so on. I think it's extremely important that we challenge that view and that we challenge the narrative that goes on. These are not people who are terrorists. They're people who are fighting for their basic rights, and they have every right to do so. And from my point of view, I think for the trade unions in this country to be involved in supporting the campaigns that have been going on over Öcalan, over full democratic rights for the Kurdish people is extremely important, because we know that in the trade unions, we know that in the Labour Party, these questions are contested, and there are a whole number of people who don't want to give this kind of support. So I think it's extremely important that we see this campaign not just as something which involves Kurdish people, but which goes right to the heart of the trade union movement, which after all still has nearly 7 million members in this country, and therefore is the largest civil society organization in this country. So very important we take this question right to the heart of it.
So another problem about Turkey, again, once we find you, we would like to ask as much as questions we can. So Turkish government recently began the process of attempting to officially shut down the HDP. Furthermore, last week we saw the racist attack and murder of a Kurdish family of 7 in Konya region of Turkey, just after the killing of HDP member Deniz Poyraz, as you remember. What are your thoughts on the Turkish government's persecution of the Kurds and how this is creating an environment of hostility and racism inside the Turkey?
Well, it strikes me that is a deliberate policy which is being perpetrated by at least some people in authority in Turkey. The terrible killing of 7 members of one family that you refer to by, it seems, the Grey Wolves, who are far-right fascist organization. It's a terrible act in itself, but it also has the impact of being like a pogrom, which is, how the attacks on Jewish people were described in Tsarist Russia. In other words, that you use physical attacks against a racial minority, against one particular group, in order to repress them as a whole. And that's what this murder has to be seen as. And it's something which we have to be very, very strongly opposed to. And we shouldn't just see it as a kind of individual crime, terrible though that is. It has a much deeper political significance and is about the repression of the Kurdish people as a whole, as is the repeated repression of the HDP and the killing of the young woman recently working in the HDP office, and all of those different things. They're not disparate things. They are part of the repressive apparatus which exists against the Kurdish people. So I think we must see them as connected in this kind of way.
Lastly, I would like to ask you that as well as we know powerful states continue to perpetuate systematic violence against women, particularly in wartime. In this context, what do you think about the Kurdish women's movement and the emphasis of the Kurdish movement on the women's liberation?
I think that for anybody who looks at the Kurdish movement, it strikes you quite forcefully the very important role of women in the Kurdish movement, and the very, very brave and very, very inspiring role that many of those women play. And we know we've seen terrible things that have happened in terms of the women who were killed in Paris a few years ago. We've seen increased repression, and it's very heartening to see that the national question, the question of the right of the Kurds to their own homeland, is also linked to the idea of women being equal and women being free, particularly if you think in a country like Turkey, where again this is a very contested question. I mean, it's a contested question everywhere, but in Turkey it's quite contested, and of course some of the conservatism is very much encouraged by government and so on. It's very, very heartening to see a different approach from Kurdish women. So full solidarity to them in terms of the role that they're playing, and also the kind of image that they're projecting to people who are looking to the Kurdish movement around the world.
Dear Lindsey German, Stop the War Coalition convener and steering member of the Freedom for Ocalan campaign, thanks for joining us. Thank you for your valuable comments today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.